Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality, and we're so glad you're here. This is a viewer and listener-supported podcast, so we greatly appreciate your support. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe to any of the social media content platforms that you're using. And then if you go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, you can make a one-time donation, or with a monthly subscription, you'll gain access to our bonus content. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning in with us for this episode. And today I have Sister Rose McLarney with us today. Thank you, Rose, for joining us.
You're welcome.
My good friend Michelle Kylo serves on the board of the CCR, Center for Conflict Resolution. And Michelle and I have been friends over the last 3.5, 4 years. In fact, she was one of the early interviews I did when I started this podcast. And I was trying to get somebody from CCR and talk about restorative justice. And so I finally got your name and tracked you down. So thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get into, the theme of restorative justice, which is what I really want to leave time to talk about, kind of dig in a little bit, because I'm fascinated with that concept and that topic. But I want to get a little bit of your story. I always like to get people's backgrounds and where you were born, where you grew up. Maybe your family background and some of your spiritual journey as well. So where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up north of Kansas City near Gower, Missouri. Went to school in Gower, church in Easton, and our address was Hempel. And my father and 4 brothers did most of the farming, and my sister and I did the housework and the chickens and garden and other things like that.
So this is a big private family farm.
Yes.
Oh, how many acre farm?
Well, it over the years it grew to 1,000 acres because different brothers would acquire land as they, got the ability to do that. And so it was turned out to be 1,000 acres.
Okay.
And my youngest brother still farms, but does it by himself now. So he has downsized. And
but same area, same land.
Area, same area. Yeah. Yeah.
How many siblings do you have?
There were 6 of us, and it was 2 boys, 2 girls, and 2 boys, and then. Occupation-wise, it was 2 attorneys, 2 nurses, and 2 farmers.
So you're kind of in the middle?
I'm in the
You have 2 older brothers, and do you have an older sister as well?
Yes.
Okay. And then 2 younger brothers?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, so growing up on the farm, you guys did cattle, hogs, chickens, crops?
Yes.
Man.
Yeah. I said they didn't have child labor laws on the farm.
Right, I know.
Because we had the chickens, we gathered the eggs, we processed the chickens and put them in the freezer to get through the winter, and canned things from the garden, and not a lot of idle moments.
Right.
But that, I love that I grew up on a farm. Mm-hmm. I think it gave me an appreciation for nature and the processes of nature and the outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah, I developed that appreciation, but just because I ended up loving backpacking, and I got into backpacking and just came to it that way. But did not grow up on a farm. I've never had a chicken, never had a hog, never had a cow, never had a horse. Never, I've only had a few cats and a few dogs in my life. That's it. But yeah, so, and your family was Catholic in background?
Yes.
McLarney. Where does that
It comes
take you?
from Ireland.
It sounds
Yes.
Irish.
Yes.
Have you been to Ireland?
I have.
Yeah.
On my sabbatical, I got a chance to go and went and didn't contact any relatives, didn't get to that point of research. But
do you know if your family's in the southern part of Ireland or?
Yes.
Southern, yeah.
Yeah.
I went to Ireland in 2018. We think it's possible that Heron, my name is Double R Heron, and it's one of the theories is that we were O'Heron and dropped the O because of a lot of Irish tried to disguise themselves at one point in American history. But there is an O'Heron County, I guess, in Ireland because when I went there with a few of my sisters and we had a blast. We spent most of our time in Northern Ireland, but up on the coast, up north coast. But God, what a great...
Yeah.
It was hard to... Everybody was so nice.
Yeah.
It was hard to believe that they ever fought each other. You know? It's like... It's like these are the nicest people on the planet.
Yeah.
You know? And I would tease them a little bit. So how did you guys get in a big fight? You know? I just like... I mean, of course, a little bit of religious history there, right? But but beautiful place, beautiful island. Well, so you strong Catholic background, Irish Catholic.
Yes, but we didn't make a big deal of being Irish.
Yeah.
And our going to school in Gower, our family, our relatives, and us were the only Catholics. So.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. So you mostly Protestants around you.
Yes.
And but you had a small church that was up there?
In Easton, yeah. Easton had the small church. In fact, the first 2 years of school, I went to a 2-room schoolhouse. Grades 1 through 4 in one room and 4 through 8 in the other room. And that was run by the Sisters of Mercy from Iowa. And then that closed. So I went to the consolidated school in Gower, which there were 18 in our class.
Wow. Were you the valedictorian?
No. I actually ended up going to the last 2 years of high school in St. Joe, Missouri. Lived with my grandmother. My sister and I lived with our grandmother, and went to the last 2 years of school there at the Convent of the Sacred Heart, which no longer exists.
You finished off in a Catholic school in St. Joe.
Yes.
Okay. So what did you do after high school then?
I went to Avila University to nursing school, and did 4 years there.
And did you go to the main campus? Because I know they have.
Well,
they do stuff all over the place now, but where was it?
At that time, the academy and the college were on the same campus, and it was actually called the College of St. Teresa. And the year that I graduated, they opened the campus, Avila campus, which is further south.
Where is it located?
It's at 120th and Warnell Road.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. And then what about you got a degree in nursing? Is that right?
Yes, got a degree in nursing. And during my junior year of college, I was on a retreat in Conception Abbey and decided I wanted to become a Sister of St. Joseph, and decided also to wait until I graduated from college before I did that.
Okay.
So I graduated in May of '62 and entered in September of that same year. And my father says, you just start earning money and you go to the convent.
Yeah. So, yeah, right. So tell us a little bit about the background of the Sisters of St. Joe.
They were founded in France in 1650 and by a Jesuit priest who was a spiritual director of some women who wanted to deepen their spirituality, and to the point that they wanted to do some ministry together and do some communal living. So he decided to found, together with them, they decided to found the Sisters of St. Joseph in France. And now they're all over the world. They're in Africa and Denmark and many different countries.
Do you call them convents or chapters or?
We call them congregations.
Congregations?
Yes.
And do you know how many congregations there are around the world now?
I would be guessing. I think there's about 40.
40?
Yes.
Okay.
Because initially when many of them developed, because communication was very difficult, they would break off and become their own congregation. And now with communications and smaller numbers, they're actually going the other way and reuniting some different congregations.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So give us kind of your background with Sisters of St. Joe, and then I want to, after that, I want to jump into some of the restorative justice ideas and stuff. Yeah.
Well, when I entered the Sisters of St. Joseph, it was prior to the Vatican Council, which made us look at who's in the church, who's involved in the church, what are their roles, and how are they living. And for the Sisters of St. Joseph, that meant looking at when we were founded, what was the intent and what was the spirituality, and to go back to that. And so that was when we changed the habit. We had been wearing the habit, and we were meant to be people to go out and be among the people and meet the needs of the people. And it was easier to do that if you wore the dress of the day rather than a habit. So we stopped wearing the habit, and also we had more of a say in what we would be doing and where we would be. But for my first assignment was prior to those changes, and so I was assigned to St. Joseph Hospital in Augusta, Georgia, and went there and did various roles in healthcare there. But one of the things I discovered while I was there, I just had the opportunity to develop some new programs, and ended up developing new things, like there was no home health care in the area, and the hospital decided to take on that role and asked me to head it up. So I established a home health care program, and during that time I was doing that, hospice was beginning to spread in the United States, and I said, that makes a lot of sense. So we implemented hospice, and I discovered that I had energy and could do that kind of thing. So beginning new programs got in my blood.
Very good. So 20 years in Augusta, Georgia.
Yes.
I told you my mother is from Savannah, and we have some relatives in Augusta. So I've been down there. I know it. Good stuff. And then where did you go from Augusta?
Well, I was elected to leadership role with the Congregation of St. Joseph, and that was back in St. Louis. So I did that for 8 years, and during that time was when I really got to go to the various places where we have sisters' missions and see different things, and just to help coordinate things across the congregation. And that was really interesting. I became aware of so many things I hadn't been before. Really broadened my perspective on things. Interesting.
So, take us to your interest in justice issues, where that developed while you were with the sisters.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Who influenced you at that point, and what got you kind of on that trajectory?
Well, there was a sister Tobias Hagen that had a retreat center right outside of St. Louis. And she would have some speakers and nationally known people in spirituality that came there. And I had the opportunity to make some of those retreats, and that just broadened even more my thinking and perspective on things. And she was very justice oriented, and had a week-long gathering of our sisters from all over the U.S. that were interested in deepening social justice and what we were doing, and got to participate with that. So it just kept deepening my passion and commitment to social justice.
Okay. Yeah. So, and you ended up from St. Louis, you had a couple of other places, right, before you landed in Kansas City?
Well, I ended up taking the position with after I finished leadership, I ended up being the director of a new nonprofit organization, Center for Women in Transition, which was working with women coming out of prison.
And was that in St. Louis?
That was in St. Louis.
Okay.
So I stayed in St. Louis and worked with that program for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Then came to Kansas City?
Yes.
And what brought you to Kansas City?
Well, when I was working with the CWID in St. Louis, the program got bigger than my energy, especially in fundraising. And so I decided to retire, and had a coworker, another sister of St. Joseph, and she decided to also resign from there. And she said, "Do you want to move to Kansas City?" And I said, "Sure." And it was just a spontaneous thing. And she has family here, and I have family here. Mm-hmm. And so we came to Kansas City, and of course started looking around to see what was going on, and worked with several different things, and realized that there was nobody in Kansas City that was inclusive in who they accepted into their programs for people coming out of prison. Mm-hmm. Some had a narrow scope that they were addressing, and that was good because they were doing a good job with those folks. But there were folks that were falling through the cracks, didn't have the assistance that we thought they should have. So Georgia was a go-getter, and she said, "Do you want to begin a new nonprofit?" And I said, "No." I said, "I've been there, done that, and I know what kind of energy it takes." And she said, "Will you be on the board of directors?" And I said, "Yes." So she became the director, and I was chair of the board, and we created a board and created the organization, and that was 10 years ago. And
this was the CCR?
No, this was the
women's.
This was Journey to New Life.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Journey to New Life is a companion organization to the Center for Conflict Resolution.
Okay.
Yeah. But, the other thing that I did when I moved to Kansas City was I, of course, got together with Diane Kaiser, who was the executive director of CCR.
Okay.
And
I haven't met her yet. Or I may have met her briefly at I went to that big dinner party they had down in maybe, I don't know how long ago that was, a year ago or 8-9 months ago. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But I probably met her there.
Yeah. And Diane asked if I would be on the board of Center for Conflict Resolution. So I joined the board.
Okay. Yeah. So that brings us together then, because Michelle Kylo is serves on the board, and she connected with you, and so I want to kind of step back and think about a big picture, and then kind of bring us into restorative justice. And so, as a pastor, I've pastored people on the right, people on the left, people everywhere in between. it's interesting to me. I think when most people think of justice, they typically think of, like Law and Order, punishing criminals, that part of justice. Then, and we could even call that punitive justice if you wanted to, right?
Yes.
The other thing that's interesting to me is like social justice is a real positive word for me. And I think, if you look at the message of the prophets, one of the things that was central to them was this message of mishpat, which is the Hebrew word for justice, which is really about social justice. It's mindfulness of those who are suffering in society, who are on the margins, who are on the outsiders, who are, for the poor, the widow, the orphan, all these vulnerable people, right? So that's all been a positive thing. But I know some of my friends on the right have demonized social justice because they think it's socialism and they don't want socialism and that kind of thing.
They're soft on crime.
Yeah, maybe that too, right? That could be another reason why they might demonize that, right? Yeah. They're socialists and they're soft on crime. Yeah, exactly. That's not my view, but I'm still, it's out there, right? It's floating around. Yeah. Then there might be other big categories of justice in our culture, but then we come to this restorative justice, philosophy, theology. That's what I really want to dive into because I've been fascinated by it, and I've only run across this phrase, this term, restorative justice, maybe in the last 10 years in my reading. But every time I read about it, it's like, oh, well, that sounds like something I'm totally into, and it sounds very, very much like a Jesus approach to justice. Or even maybe a prophetic, Hebrew approach to justice. But yeah, so give us a big picture, and then help us start. Let's unpack restorative justice within that. Maybe start with the bigger cultural context of just justice in general, and then bring us to this social justice or this restorative justice concept.
Well, restorative justice really looks at who's been harmed and what needs to happen to heal the harm. And the our criminal justice now is punitive, and it takes the perspective of if you punish them, they won't do it, without looking at why are they doing what they're doing. And if anybody experiences some of the restorative justice practices, the experience is totally different. An example is we have neighborhood accountability boards. And a first-time low-level offender comes to the neighborhood accountability board instead of going to court and sits there with the victim and some community members. And they get a chance to say what was going on in their life, why did they do what they did. And so everybody gains an understanding of, okay, what's the dynamic, what's going on here? And then what would it take to heal the harm? The victim gets heard and gets a chance to say, this is how I've been harmed and this is what I want in order to be healed. And community members get to say, well, what's our role in this, and how have we been harmed? How's the community been harmed? And then everybody decides what happens. But very frequently, part of the outcome of that is, what does the offender need so they don't do what they did? And it may be, a real example was a lady with a baby who was having teething problems, and she went into a drugstore and shoplifted some of that teething medicine to put on the babies. And she didn't have the money to buy it. that's a simple example, but that's just an example of how it works. And so the focus is on restoration rather than punishment. It wasn't going to do any good to punish her. Wasn't going to stop her need.
Right.
So it actually goes all the way back to the Native American way of handling conflict and handling when harm has been done. They sat in a circle and again listened to what's going on, what are the dynamics among us, and what needs to happen. So that's the basis of restorative justice, is the Native American way of solving differences and harm.
Yeah, so let's tease that out a bit. So in our when us Europeans started arriving in America, there was already this robust indigenous peoples and cultures all over North America. They actually had a system of justice in place that had a restorative angle to it.
Yes.
So, like, instead of just like, did indigenous peoples have prisons before we got here?
No. They part of addressing the need for repairing the harm might be to ask the offender to be separate for a period of time, to think about their perspective and what they did and why they did it, and then they could come back to the circle, to the group. So they're, but that wasn't considered for punishment. It was considered for restoring that person.
So the objective in these indigenous circles of working through pain and if somebody had stolen something, somebody inflicted violence on somebody murdered somebody, even, there would be these circles that they would sit and have a discussion.
Right.
But the goal was always restoration and healing, not punishment.
Yes.
Is that right?
Right.
And that was like a part of the whole indigenous culture in America, cut through all the different tribes and everything?
I'm not sure that it cut through all the tribes, but it was a basic principle of most of the tribes, yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
But when the Europeans came, we brought our system of justice, which was primarily punishment.
Yes.
And prisons and jails.
Well, when you think even, when Australia was founded.
A penal colony, right?
Yeah, a penal colony.
Yeah.
They were sent away. Instead of what does the person need and what does the community need, they were sent to a foreign country. So, yeah.
Interesting. It's such a challenging thing, when Jesus said to love your enemy, right?
Yes.
Like that, I think that is the most challenging. I think for most people, it's easily the most challenging thing that Jesus ever said. Because, we can have somebody disagree with us politically or philosophically or religiously, and we feel like we have an enemy.
Yeah.
And just disagreeing with us, And then, if somebody really hurts us or wounds us, it can be really challenging to work through forgiveness issues. It's easier to armor up with anger and want to get even or blame or resent, And then the more severe the hurt or the more severe the crime, the deeper the wound, right?
Right.
So.
And in our perspective, which we haven't really stopped to analyze and say how untrue it is the concept of justice, that if somebody gets capital punishment, then it's like that takes away the pain of the family of the person that was murdered. And it doesn't. That's a misnomer. that it takes away their pain. It doesn't. I think it's just that we've said for so long, well, now justice has been served.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't been served. Killing another person doesn't mean that killing is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, violence doesn't heal violence.
Right.
Right. So I'm going to give some real concrete examples here, and let's talk. Let's apply restorative justice to a couple of these concrete examples. Actually, very close to me. So one I'm thinking of right now is it Ralph Yarl?
Oh, yeah.
Ralph Yarl. He was a young African American student at Staley High School, just a few minutes from here. I lived, my house previous to this where we're recording now was 2 minutes from Staley High School. And Ralph, I think, is that the right first name, Matt? Ralph Yarl? Yeah. He was going to pick up a friend, I think, at night.
No, he was going to pick up his
sibling. And the address, I think, was instead of a certain street, he went to a terrace or vice versa. It was a terrace, like such and such terrace.
Yeah.
And he went to the street, rings the doorbell,
right.
And an 80-something-year-old white man sees a black guy on his porch and shoots him through the window. This just happened a few weeks ago. It made national news.
Right.
I went to the students had a peace march.
Yeah.
And I went to that and met with some of the women, some of my African American women friends, and it was more as a peace kind of, but to bring attention to this, right?
Yeah.
So here you have this 80-something-year-old man who's living alone. How in the world would we heal this? Because the punishment factor is, well, get the white guy, and punish him. How in the world would restorative justice work in that situation?
Well, first, a basic principle that I have is that God created good, and so I view all people and all things as sacred that have been created by God. And taking that mindset, then I look at the white man who did it as good person. Something went wrong someplace. And so one of the basic questions of restorative justice is, well, how do you repair the harm that's been done? And that's difficult when you have a murder. So this young boy is not going to be...
Thank God he lived, right? It's a pretty big miracle, actually, but yeah.
Oh, that's right, he did.
Yeah, he lived, yeah.
That's right, he did.
He got shot in the eye and in the arm, but still survived this.
Yeah.
It's like, whew.
Yeah.
It's a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
For the family, for the kid,
And so what does Ralph and his family need in order to be healed?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, what does the man who did it, what does he need?
But
our instinct.
Don't we have to think that way, right?
Yes.
I think so.
Right. It really stretches us to really use this.
Yeah. We just want to.
And it doesn't mean anybody gets off, because one of the basic principles of restorative justice is to hold the offender accountable for what they did. They can't deny it. They've got to admit what they did. And there are, people who will say, well, he was justified in what he did. Well, that has to be looked at. Was he really justified in what he did? I say no.
I don't think ringing your doorbell should get you shot.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So, I mean, he could, who knows what was in the man's mind that shot Ralph. What was going on in his brain and why he responded that way.
Right.
We don't know that, but But it does think about both the victim and the perpetrator, and thinks about how to each of these people walk through healing.
Yeah.
And it even thinks about the community that surrounds the victim and the perpetrator, and how does the community walk through healing.
As well as, what is our responsibility in truly creating community? If we've got people with what I call extreme thinking on something that can be very harmful, then what am I doing as a member of the community to examine that thinking and deal with it and get it back on balance?
Yeah. It's such tough work, and the systems in place don't, our justice systems don't move toward what you're talking about.
Right.
We have to create new approaches to help that happen.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not going to happen through our justice systems in America today. Like healing for the victim, healing for the perpetrator, and healing for the community is not the goal of any of our systems that are currently in place. Would you say that to be true?
There are some openings for change, and this is sad to say, but what's gotten some legislators and community members thinking differently is we're spending $80 billion a year on incarcerating people, and 68% of the people that come out go back in. Well, that's not working. That makes no economical sense, let alone justice sense.
And plus, if you look at the racial breakdown on our prison systems, it's the poor and the race and poverty play a role in who gets in prison and who doesn't, right?
Yeah, there's a book called The New Jim Crow. Mass incarceration.
Yeah,
the new Jim Crow.
It's big business.
Yeah.
Like these prisons make massive amounts of money, and so if you look at the prison system since Reagan and the money that's gone, it's just bizarre. Yeah. And the numbers of people that, and they keep building more of these prisons all over the country, and they're big money makers.
Well, we're sitting in Jackson County in Kansas City that's just building a new jail to house 1,000 inmates.
Yeah.
And I forget what the price tag on that is. Yeah. But if that was used instead to start looking at our justice system, and there's good people in the justice system that want to see it change. Right.
Exactly. And it's not all evil people out there doing this stuff, right? Yeah. Right. No, there's good-hearted people that. But so I'll give you another concrete example. So I just did a funeral yesterday for a 22-year-old lady who went missing a year ago, Abby Schaefer, and they just found her body 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Wow.
And they have not. So they're still collecting data on this. It's possible. It's still unknown at this point what exactly happened, but there's a big chance that this is a murder, and that her body's showed up definitely in the woods, hidden somewhere, So the body was discarded without, So when I did of course, I'm speaking to, a young crowd. It's this 22-year-old gal who was loved, and I'm talking about, well, how do we work through this? There's so much, there's survivor guilt. What could I have done differently? Could I have done something different that changed the situation? Would she still be alive? There's the anger toward the perpetrators of her death, who still are kind of almost unknown, even though they have some hints. there's all the, just the pain, the sorrow, the suffering, the trauma. And I'm still trying to give a message like, sometimes it feels like the whole universe is against us or God's against us, and trauma, where's God in the midst of all of that? There's that side to it. But then there's also, I always talk about forgiveness in those situations, and, violence doesn't heal violence. Hatred doesn't heal hatred. Only love can do that. And really only healing and restoration can heal all the parties involved in that situation. But how would restorative justice come into play in a situation like this? I was just with this family yesterday.
Yeah.
We're recording on what is today, May the 16th,
yeah,
of 2023, and I just did the funeral yesterday for Abby Schaefer.
One of the things with restorative justice is some people equate restorative justice and forgiveness, and we don't go there with that. And the reason is it can do harm to people who aren't at that point. And somebody has to come to forgiveness because they're willing to do that and see a need for it themselves. Rather than doing it for somebody else. Or, so if they're not psychologically ready and emotionally ready, we don't have an expectation of forgiveness. I've talked to many people who have gone to forgiveness, but they do it because they realize that if they stay in the anger, if they stay in the, angst, it's hurting them because they're holding on to those emotions. So they need to do it for themselves, not for other people.
Yeah.
But to,
I appreciate that distinction between forgiveness and restorative justice.
Yeah.
The anger that comes is natural.
Right. Exactly.
It's a human emotion.
Exactly.
It's actually nothing wrong with that emotion,
right.
But processing it in a healthy way,
right.
that I think usually ultimately in the long run, when the person's ready for their own health, for their own well-being, they do need to let it go, right?
Yeah. There's many instances in which, say, the first time that in a mediation where an offender and a victim actually meet each other, and they're not thinking about forgiveness. They just want to come to an understanding, or the offender may have, the victim may have some questions, things they want to know from the offender. And it's not unusual that if that is really an open process and the offender takes accountability and the victim sees that, this is basically a good person, something just went wrong here and caused the offense, then it's not unusual that the person comes to forgiveness. But they've gone through that process and they come to it without it being in any way an expectation or forced.
So you've got to dive into these situations, like let's say CCR here in Kansas City, Center for Conflict Resolution.
Yes.
This is you're working these programs both with people coming out of prison, but you're also working them in schools, right? Some of the schools and stuff like that.
The main work of the people coming out of prison is the Journey to New Life organization.
Okay.
But Center for Conflict Resolution goes in many different places, addressing how do you manage conflict. You don't get rid of conflict. It happens. It's everywhere. Right. But the goal is to learn to manage conflict and to put restorative practices in place instead of punitive. Mm-hmm. So CCR goes into the schools and has training sessions with faculty and staff first, so that there's practices on their part that are not, instead of being punitive, instead of suspending people, you look at, is that going to be healing for anybody? Or is it just going to put a student further behind? But maybe they do need that time out from being with the others. So it looks at what's going to be healing here and what's going to decrease the conflict. They also teach circles where, say, a classroom will have a circle and talk about, is there something going on dynamic that's harming the classmates, or is there a particular person that's harming their classmates? And once that person really hears and sees what's harming them and how it's harming them, they come to remorse on their own. Whereas they may come in saying, I had a reason for what I was doing.
Yeah.
But when they hear how they've harmed other people, that changes them.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's say some kind of a violence breaks out in a school between maybe two students. And let's say CCR, Center for Conflict Resolution, is working in this school. What would, and let's say it's not a murder, but let's say somebody's been injured, harmed through physical violence. So there's a victim and there's a perpetrator in a school, let's say a high school. How in the world do you get people to the table? Like, how do you get people into circles like that? Who wants to? How did you have the influence to actually transact a circle where you would have the perpetrator, the victim, and some of the community around it or families around it?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that we would do is to talk with the various parties involved to see what's their perspective, because one of the things is you don't ever want to re-victimize somebody. So you don't want to start thinking about a particular practice or a particular way of dealing with it that's going to just make it worse. So the first thing is to talk to all of the relevant parties and see what their thinking is and where they are now and what they're willing to do or what their hopes are, and then decide what's the best practice. It might be to bring those two individuals together, or sometimes the parents may be present as well, either as support or what's going on in the home. So it's very particularized to the individuals that we're dealing with. And we always have mediations that are done by two mediators, not one, so that we're a backup to each other and can make sure that it's a safe situation when we do it. We've had sessions where police were in the background or right outside the door, if that's needed.
Right, because violence could break out again.
It could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though you're trying to do...
We don't think it's going to.
Right.
But we always go to the safety factor.
So can you think of a story, like a highlight reel for where maybe there was pretty severe victim, pretty severe perpetrator, a community that you actually saw this play out to where there was really some healing in both parties and in the community?
This isn't a severe one, but it just, to me, says so much about the restorative process. Was this took place with a student in the Liberty schools.
Okay.
And we were asked to mediate between the student and personnel from the school. And this boy was part of a group of 6 boys that decided that they were going to go to where the buses are kept overnight, and they threw rocks and broke out the mirrors and the windows of the buses. So when the bus drivers get there the next morning early to go out on their routes, they can't because they don't have operating mirrors. And
this is more than one boy.
Well, we were dealing just with this one particular boy
that vandalized these buses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the representative of the school got to say to this boy the implications on the school, all of the different things that there were kids waiting on school, street corners waiting to be picked up, but they couldn't because the buses couldn't operate. The expense of it, the insurance involvement, he was able to say all of the different things. We learned from the boy what was going on in his life, and he had gotten involved with these other boys that liked violence, and that was what they were doing. So just because he wanted to be accepted with these other boys, he was doing these things along with them. And so we had this session, and he wasn't doing well in school. So at the end of the first mediation, he was given goals of what, and he agreed. You always have agreement of everybody. So he agreed that he would keep they had some kind of a notebook where they kept what all of their responsibilities were, the schoolwork and stuff, and when they were to have it done. So he was to complete that every day and attend school. He had been skipping a lot of school and attend school. And we would get back together in 2 weeks. And so we got back together in 2 weeks, and he had done what he said he would do. And the school representative said, I'm glad, I congratulate you, but I want to be sure this isn't just a one-time thing to make me happy. So I want us to get back together again in a month. And one of the things that was decided was that he would join a school-sponsored sport. So he could get involved with different kids and feel accepted and feel a part of things. And so he did that. And when we got back together in a month, he was on the honor roll at school. He was attending school on a regular basis, completing his assignment. And so that was the outcome of it. So it was, may seem minor, but when you think of somebody that's on the trajectory and the path of violence and getting in with the wrong people who are also doing that, it changed the trajectory.
Yeah. And if you only punish him, it could just make him more angry and more violent and perpetuate that. This actually at least gave him the opportunity to change, to be restored himself, to change the trajectory of his life. Wow. Yeah. That's such a huge, that's just one example.
That's one example.
And you think about all the schools.
Yeah.
And all the violence and all the crimes and how much time and effort it takes to do that, right? I mean, this is not, this isn't like something you do in 15 minutes or, we can fix this in 30 minutes, Right. This is
and even in that example, we talked with the parties involved prior to having a mediation. You don't just go and sit down and start. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, wow. I love this concept.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's like, oh my gosh, the time that it takes to heal, but it's true in anything. I mean,
Yeah.
if like I've been in recovery for about 3.5 years, and working the 12 steps and stuff like that, and the time, like if I log the hours that I've put in to meetings and working the steps and making amends and all those kinds of things, healing takes time and work.
Yes.
It takes time and work. And if we're committed to, like, and I love this. I like starting out at Genesis 1 and 2. The original blessing, as Matthew Fox talks about.
Yes.
Matthew Fox. I've been trying to get an interview with Matthew Fox. He's still alive, but he wrote this book called, I think it's Original Blessing.
Yes.
It's a beautiful book of spirituality, but he kind of builds out of Genesis 1 and 2 and start instead of Genesis 3, which is where so many theologians start. But that commitment to the value of every human being, the dignity and worth of every human being, because they're created in the image of God. We're all children of God. Right. And starting with that foundation, and then actually holding on to that, even in the midst of these situations where people do really horrible things. But how do we heal people? And just the execution of punishment doesn't even heal the families that are the victims, or the individuals that are the victims. So it's a bigger approach to actually restoration. And to me, it is this stuff about, loving your enemies is like that's how do we actually do that? And this is an approach to actually do that. Don't you think?
Yes.
It's actually a proven approach that has worked with indigenous American people for who knows how long, right? And then it's working. We're seeing this play out in places around the country, right? And even the world. Well, there's a little bit of a footprint starting to happen around the world.
Yeah, there's now a national restorative justice organization, and there's an international one. We had the opportunity to create the Missouri Restorative Justice Coalition almost 20 years ago now. One of our goals is to get it being taught in the criminal justice programs in the institutions. We look at what's going to put it there, what's going to start,
planting seeds into people's hearts and minds.
Right.
I love this.
Yeah.
I love this. Wow. I could get behind something like this. I mean, obviously in my role as pastor, I'm doing funerals like yesterday, and there's, I'm always trying to think about healing and restoration, but such a challenging.
Well, and the Center for Conflict Resolution really is making a difference in inroads into the systems, not just, doing the practices in schools and in mediations and various settings and things, but Annette Lance Simmons, that is the current executive director of it, is doing a fantastic job. And she is so good at it that it's now being recognized by the mayor, by, various groups who invite her to be part of the Partners for Peace, which is trying to bring together the head of the police department, the prosecutor's office, the mayor, the city council, so that it's all of us working together to do something toward being partners for peace. So CCR is doing the actual day-to-day things, but they're also helping to build the systems so that they're restorative.
I love it. I love it. Wow. Thank you so much. I love your commitment to this and how you've been a part of this now for, 20 years or so?
20 years, yeah.
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 Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Rose, for Spirituality Adventures. Thank you for taking time and sharing your story. And man, if I could shout this from the mountaintop and help people hear this, I would encourage everybody to jump into this idea of restorative justice, because I do think it can heal and save and restore and create new futures for people, Beautiful stuff. Is there one book you might recommend?
Well, there's for getting a basic understanding, there's a little book of restorative justice, and
is that the title of it? The Little Book of Restorative Justice.
Okay. Restorative Justice. So it starts out with the very basic, simple things and the principles and philosophy of restorative justice.
Okay, awesome. And then how about you? Do you have a Facebook page or website or anything if somebody wanted to give you a...
Center for Conflict Resolution does. Yes.
Okay.
They have a Facebook page. They have a website.
All right, beautiful. Well, Sister Rose McLarney, thank you so much for your ministry, your commitment to Jesus, and to live out some of these principles of restorative justice. Thanks for joining us on Spirituality Adventures. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and we will see you next time. This concludes today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Remember to like, share, or subscribe to the social media platform that you're using. And then go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, and make a one-time donation, or you can subscribe monthly and receive our special bonus content. Thanks so much.